At its peak, under Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottoman Empire controlled a massive swath of Southeast Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. The empire ruled over numerous ethnic and religious groups while also being the epicenter of the Islamic world. It officially came to an end in 1923 after over 600 years. So, what happened to the Ottoman Empire? A prominent view for many years was that the Ottoman Empire, despite reform initiatives, was doomed to collapse due to failures to industrialize and modernize. This suggests that the Ottoman Empire lagged behind the progress of its European neighbors, and they were therefore the authors of their own demise. This point of view fails to take into account the unique challenges that faced the Ottoman state, and also neglects to notice the incredible adaptation that the Ottomans displayed to maintain their empire for so long. While the size and prominence of the empire did gradually decline into the 19th century, it's far too simplistic to say that the collapse of the Ottoman state was inevitable. The perfect storm of multiple wars, including a world war, rising nationalisms among subject peoples, and massive population migrations contributed significantly to the demise of a once great power. Caught between the challenges of outside threats from the great powers and internal fragmentation of its varied population, the Ottoman Empire, similar to many other states during the 19th century, tried to use reforms and education to achieve greater unity and loyalty to the state. While not ultimately successful in creating a truly Ottoman identity, these attempts cannot be seen just as a failure to westernize. An emphasis on the blending of Islamic traditional values with Western reforms shows that Ottoman officials did not just sit back and let their empire die, but they were also not willing to give up their spot as the religious and moral authority of the Islamic world for the sake of progress. The Ottoman state maintained its long-held socio-political tradition of the millet system. This system categorized its minority populations along religious lines, and it was continued into the 19th century. The empire granted autonomy to local populations regarding many aspects of their society. This included the form and content of local elementary schools. Each of these communities was allowed to educate their children in the language of their preference and in keeping with their religious beliefs. The result of the millet system on education was to create a vast variety of schools, almost entirely beyond the control of the Ottoman state. These schools were many times set up by foreign missionaries, religious denominations, local elites, or even the Ottoman state. Schools are a great example to show that the Ottoman system was designed to keep a variety of ethnicities and minority populations coexisting, but it also shows how challenging it was to create an Ottoman identity. This hurt efforts to industrialize the Ottoman economy and military. It also hurt the Sultan's ability to keep his people unified against external enemies and internal divisions. The Tanzimat period of the Ottoman Empire began a major shift in the structure of government within the empire. The reforms of this period were aimed at keeping the Ottomans on pace with their European competitors, particularly in the areas of military training and civil service. Initial reforms of Ottoman society began under the leadership of Sultan Mahmud II, but they were not fully set up until the Tanzimat period of 1839 to 1876. Seen as the sick man of Europe, the Ottoman Empire struggled, despite the Tanzimat, to reap the benefits of recognition as European. The continued presence of Islamic principles and morality as an important part of Ottoman rule was viewed by Europeans as a misstep on the path to progress. This led nearby powers like Great Britain and the Russian Empire to look for ways to undermine Ottoman rule and promote nationalism as a way forward for the minority ethnic groups who had long lived in Ottoman territory. Nationalist tensions really stepped up in the Ottoman Balkans with the rise of Bulgarian nationalism in the late 1800s. The Balkans continued to fragment as ideas of ethnic nationalism took root and eventually led to two Balkan wars between 1912 and 1913. This marked the beginning of a long stretch of conflict between 1912 and 1923 that some scholars refer to as the War of Ottoman Succession. This period included Ottoman participation in World War I in alliance with Germany and Austro-Hungary to form the Central Powers. During this period of tumult, the Ottoman Empire lost roughly 20% of its population. By comparison, France only lost 3.5% of its population during the entirety of World War I. Along with the burdens of war and the growing power of nationalism, the Ottoman Empire had to deal with a staggering amount of population movement. Greek Christians were expelled from what is modern-day Turkey 3 different times. Balkan Muslims were forced to migrate by the hundreds of thousands during the Balkan Wars. Turkish Muslims became refugees due to the Greco-Turkish conflict. And the Ottoman government, led by the Young Turks in 1914, ruthlessly targeted Armenians for mass murder and forced migration, resulting in what was once the 2,133,000 Armenian population in 1914 to be only about 387,000 by 1922. To echo the words of one scholar, this is a picture of a whole empire walking. The aftermath of all this was the growth of a Turkish national movement led by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. In 1923, the Republic of Turkey was born, and the remnants of the Ottoman Empire were gone. Along with it disappeared the unity of the Islamic world, as the Caliphate, led for hundreds of years by the Ottoman sultans, was abolished in 1924. There's been no caliph since then. Ottoman lands were divided and split by the European victors of World War I, forming many of the current geopolitical borders and conflicts of the Middle East. The demise of the Ottoman Empire cannot be seen as simply a failure to adapt to modernity. Rather, it should be viewed as the outcome of a much broader conflict. It took a combination of wars, intense nationalism, massive migrations, and outsider interference to bring down the Ottoman Empire.